She is officially recorded as the most prolific female serial killer in history. 650 victims. And the Hungarian government sealed her trial records for 100 years to stop the public from finding out the truth. Hungary. 1609. A group of girls had gone missing. Not one or two. Not even 10. Dozens of young women, servants, peasants, minor nobility had vanished without trace from the villages surrounding a remote castle in the Carpathian Mountains. The rumors had circulated for years. But no one had dared investigate. Because the castle belonged to one of the most powerful women in all of Europe. Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Wife of a war hero. Member of one of Hungary's most noble families. A woman so influential that the King of Hungary himself owed her money. But when investigators finally entered her castle in December 1609, what they found inside would shock even the hardened soldiers who had fought in Europe's bloodiest wars. This is the story of the Blood Countess. And it is far darker than any legend. But to understand what Elizabeth Bathory became, you must first understand the world she was born into, and what it did to her. Elizabeth Bathory was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful families in Hungary. The Bathory family had produced kings, princes, and military commanders. Her uncle was the King of Poland. From birth, Elizabeth inhabited a world where power was absolute and cruelty was commonplace. As a child, she witnessed brutal punishments carried out on servants and peasants. She reportedly witnessed a soldier being sewn alive inside a dying horse as punishment for theft. This was not unusual for the time. At the age of 13, Elizabeth was engaged to Ferenc Nadasdy, a celebrated military commander known as the Black Knight of Hungary. They married when she was 15. While her husband spent years away at war, Elizabeth was left alone to manage their vast estates. A network of castles, thousands of servants, absolute authority over every soul within her lands. And slowly, something dark began to take shape. The first reports of violence against servants emerged within years of her marriage. Beatings. Burnings. Needles pushed under fingernails. At first, it was dismissed as the discipline of a noblewoman over her servants. But the violence grew. And grew. And grew. Because what Elizabeth Bathory was doing was not discipline. It was something far more calculated. Far more deliberate. And far more terrifying. Countess Castle sat on a rocky hilltop in what is now western Slovakia. To the villages below, it was a place of fear. Young women who entered its walls rarely returned. Inside, Elizabeth had created something that defied comprehension. A torture chamber. Girls, mostly servants and peasants recruited with promises of work and wages, were imprisoned in the castle's dungeons. They were beaten with iron rods. They were burned with hot pokers and candles. They were forced outside in winter and doused with cold water until they froze to death. Needles and pins were driven beneath their fingernails. Their fingers were cut off. Their skin was bitten, by Elizabeth herself, according to witness testimony. The legend of blood bathing, that Elizabeth bathed in the blood of young women to preserve her youth, emerged from witness accounts given during her trial. Whether literally true or an embellishment of the truth, the reality of what happened inside Countess Castle was horrifying enough without the legend. For years, the bodies were disposed of quietly. Buried in unmarked graves. Thrown into pits. Even buried beneath the floorboards of the castle itself. And no one stopped her. Because she was Elizabeth Bathory. And in 16th century Hungary, a noblewoman of her status was almost entirely beyond the reach of the law. But Elizabeth made one critical mistake. A mistake that finally brought her crimes into the light, and led to the most shocking arrest in Hungarian history. For years, Elizabeth's victims had been peasants and servants. Their disappearances were tragic, but they were not investigated. In the rigid class system of 16th century Europe, the lives of poor girls were worth very little. But sometime around 1609, Elizabeth made a catastrophic error of judgment. She began targeting girls of minor nobility. Young women from families who had names, who had connections, who had people who would ask questions. The complaints began reaching King Matthias II of Hungary. And here the story takes a dark political turn. Because King Matthias had a powerful personal motive for acting against Elizabeth Bathory. He owed her an enormous sum of money, a debt so large it threatened the royal treasury. If Elizabeth were arrested and convicted, her lands and wealth would be seized. The debt would be erased. In December 1609, Count Georgi Thurzo, the king's representative, led a raid on Countess castle. What he found there was beyond anything even he had prepared for. Bodies in various states. Girls imprisoned in the dungeons. And Elizabeth Bathory herself, apparently caught in the act. She was arrested on the spot. The most powerful noblewoman in Hungary had finally been stopped. But what happened at her trial was almost as disturbing as the crimes themselves. Because the Hungarian government did something extraordinary to keep the truth hidden. Elizabeth Bathory never stood trial herself. In a concession to her noble status, she was spared the public humiliation of a court appearance. Instead, her servants and accomplices were tried in her place. 4 of them. They confessed, under torture, to participating in the killings. The number of victims stated in the trial testimony was staggering. One witness claimed to have seen a list, written in Elizabeth's own handwriting, of 650 names. 650. The accomplices were executed. One had her fingers torn off before being burned alive. Another was beheaded. But Elizabeth herself was never executed. Instead, she was walled into a set of rooms in Countess castle. The windows and doors were bricked up. Food was passed through a small slot. She lived like this for 3 years. Until her death in 1614. And then the Hungarian government did something that historians have debated ever since. They sealed the trial records. For 100 years. No one was allowed to speak of Elizabeth Bathory's crimes publicly. The official reason given was to protect the honor of the noble class. But many historians believe the real reason was simpler. The king did not want anyone asking too many questions about why the most prolific serial killer in Hungarian history was never publicly tried. And why her death so conveniently erased a very large royal debt. Because even today, 400 years later, the full truth of what happened inside Countess castle has never been fully established. And some historians believe the story we know may not be the whole story. Elizabeth Bathory has been called the most prolific female serial killer in recorded history. But in recent decades, some historians have raised uncomfortable questions about her case. The evidence against her came almost entirely from testimony extracted under torture. Her accusers had powerful political and financial motives. The king who ordered her arrest stood to gain enormously from her conviction. Some historians argue that while Elizabeth was certainly capable of cruelty, as were most powerful nobles of her era, the scale of the crimes attributed to her may have been exaggerated. That the number 650 was a political weapon as much as a historical fact. Others point to the physical evidence found in the castle. The bodies, the imprisoned girls, the testimony of survivors, and argue that regardless of the political machinations surrounding her arrest, the crimes themselves were real. The truth, as with so many dark chapters of history, lies somewhere in the shadow between what we know and what was deliberately hidden. What is certain is this: dozens of young women entered Countess castle and were never seen again. And the most powerful government in the region spent 100 years trying to make sure no one talked about it. And the castle itself, the place where all of this happened, still stands today. And what visitors report there is deeply unsettling. Countess castle sits in ruins on its rocky hilltop in western Slovakia. The roof is long gone. The walls are crumbling. But the structure remains silent, imposing, overlooking the same villages whose daughters once disappeared. Today it is a tourist attraction. Visitors climb the hill and walk through the ruins. And a significant number of them report the same experiences. An overwhelming sense of dread in certain rooms. Sudden and unexplained drops in temperature. The feeling of being watched from empty doorways. Local guides report that some visitors refuse to enter certain parts of the castle at all. That their instinct simply will not allow them to go further. Whether or not you believe in the paranormal, there is something undeniable about standing in a place where hundreds of people suffered and died. Something that the stone itself seems to remember. And Countess Castle has had 400 years to remember. Elizabeth Bathory died alone. Walled into her rooms. Cut off from the world she had dominated. Whether she was the monster history recorded, or a powerful woman destroyed by political enemies, or both, the suffering of the girls inside her castle was real. Their names were never recorded. Their stories were sealed away for a century. They deserved better than that. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Veil of Europa. Every week, we uncover the dark history Europe tried to forget. The forgotten. The sealed. The deliberately hidden. We'll see you in the shadows.